but he's going to be putting his men in harm's way, and there's nothing of strategic value inside of St. Cloud. His objective is to take over the city of Oran, and he doesn't need St. Cloud to do it, and he's not going to put his men in harm's way for no reason. The next,
they can hit you from behind, or they can actually have the ability to lift sieges. They're going to be a pain in the ass. So, question now is he going to bypass the town, or what?
thing he could do is bombard it with artillery, but there's a bunch of civilians that live in that town too, so that option is also out. So Terry takes
he was a class act with that horse, so he's not going to basically just go around and bomb civilians.
His battalions, fortifies it, and has them surround the town so the enemy can't get out, and then launch a counterattack later, and continues to move the 1st Infantry Division towards the objective. Okay, this is brilliant. This is literally what the Marines did in the Pacific Theater with—
So he basically just encircled the town and then proceeded to the objective, so they can't get hit in the back.
The island hopping strategy, except Terry is doing it in North Africa with entire towns. Now remember, this is 25 miles they have to walk to Oran, carrying all their shit after landing on a wet beach, probably being soaked, okay? This is gonna be a jaunt and a half. It's gonna be exhausting and it's gonna take time. The first ID moves all through the night, all through the day of November 9th, and Terry is pushing his men to the point of exhaustion. On the morning of the 10th, Terry is up on the front line with his men after everybody's been walking for a day and a half, and as he's patrolling the front line, seeing how everybody's doing, he comes across this utterly exhausted rifle company that's taking shelter inside of a ditch next to a road because there's some stray artillery fire coming in. So Terry walks through the ditch, gets on the other side, and he's standing, and he can see the city of Oran off in the distance, and he's looking around, he's looking at the faces of his men. He knows they're exhausted. The men are looking back at him like, okay, here it comes. We're about to get our ass chewed because we're taking a break. Fuck. So Terry looks back at the city of Oran, and then he looks back at the men, and he says, and I quote, "There's a lot of good-looking girls in that city ready to welcome the liberating Americans."
Where did Hackett go?
There's gold in them.
And with that, his men got up, reinvigorated, and continued towards the objective. Again, Terry showing his expert leadership, being able to get the absolute most out of his men when shit sucks. One of the men that served under Terry later described his leadership style as something along the lines of, he always wanted to achieve the objective, not because he was worried that he would get in trouble or get chewed out by Terry, but because he genuinely did not want to let Terry down, because he respected him that much. So they cleared
a good dad, alright? Not that bullshit boomer stuff.
25 miles, they take over the city of Oran, they achieve the objective, and as a reward, Command decides—
Were there actual girls there in the town? Were they good looking? Guess we'll never find out.
Terry Allen is supposed to hunker down in the city of Oran and piecemeal out his 1st Infantry Division to support other elements.
But you can't do this to me.
At this point, Terry's pissed. He thinks he has the best infantry division in the army, and he doesn't think that he should be piecemealing out his men to play support roles for everybody else. He thinks that he should be up on the front lines charging towards the enemy. And this goes on for months. The entire time, Terry is raising hell with his chain of command, and his chain of command just simply isn't hearing it. And after 3 months go by, Terry's finally had enough. He goes over all of his boss's heads and goes straight into General Eisenhower's office, looks him in the eyes, and says, and I quote, "Is this a private war or can anybody get in?" General Eisenhower, impressed by Terry, issues the command to reassemble the 1st Infantry Division and get them into combat, infuriating all of the officers in between because Terry just went over their head to the big boss. So now Terry's got his entire division back, all of his men are under his command, and what he decides to do is he wants to start getting them trained and ready to go into combat. He gives them extensive night fight training and gets them ready for combat with like the couple of weeks that they have. Early March, Terry gets an order that him and the 1st Infantry Division are supposed to go take over a city in Tunisia known as Gafsa, about 45 miles away from Oran. Terry needs to have the entire division moved into place on March 16th, just north of the city, and then on the morning of March—
I mean, Tunisia is where the 1970 film pattern started, or where it began.
17th at first light, they are going to attack and take over the entire city. So Terry does just that. They arrive on the 16th, exactly where they're supposed to be, and that night, Terry says, you know what? Fuck it. We're gonna fight at night. Terry essentially defies orders of fighting at first light when the enemy can see and launches a surprise attack that night. The 1st ID takes over the entire city with minimal casualties. The first thing the next morning, Terry's boss, a guy by the name of General Patton, shows up because he wants to see the assault take place. Right as the sun's coming up, General Patton storms into Terry's headquarters asking what the hell's going on, why don't I see any movement, why aren't you attacking? Terry nonchalantly informs General Patton, battle's over, I already have all the objectives.
Let me hear you say it. Let me hear you say, good job.
Good job. Good.
Well, now Patton's not pissed off that the objective wasn't met. Now he's pissed off that it wasn't met exactly how he wanted it to be met, and he demands an explanation from Terry. At this point, Terry casually asks General Patton, do you know who Newt Rockne is? At which point, Patton responds, yeah, what the hell does a Swedish football player have to do with war? If you don't know, Newt Rockne was the guy that popularized forward passing in American football, so Terry explains to him the night attack is essentially the forward pass in the infantry. Telling Patton, and I quote, why would I beat my brains out for a yard and a half when I could just pass the ball for 40 yards? At which point General Patton says again, and I quote, oh, and then he fucking leaves. From here, Terry and the First ID are ordered to help the Allied forces take over the next city, El Gater. Again, they launch a surprise attack, taking over all the preliminary objectives.
Did Patton actually like him? I mean, he definitely was under Patton's command during that time, at that point.
And from here, they experience heavy German resistance, a ton of counterattacks. They're getting strafed by the Luftwaffe. They're getting hit by artillery. It is an absolute shit show. After a couple of days of fighting, Erwin Rommel sends in a bunch of heavy tanks to punch through the American 1st Infantry Division's lines, and they are making a beeline straight towards Terry's headquarters, at which point Terry is ordered to fall back, to which he responds to his chain of command, I will like hell fall back and I will shoot the first bastard that does. And the 1st Infantry goes on to repel the attack. That very same day, Allied intelligence cracks the German battle code and they intercept a radio transmission saying that the attack is going to resume at 1600. A little bit later, they intercept another transmission that says the attack has been postponed until 1645. Now, to most people, this just seems like good information to have. Right now, we can, be ready and defend ourselves when this attack comes.
Sounds
but
like
the
a
good
trap.
old terrible Terry, he sees a unique opportunity to fuck with the enemy, and that's exactly what he's gonna do. So Terry waits until 1615, 15 minutes after the initial attack was supposed to take place, and then he orders his communications unit to send a transmission on the German radio frequency that says, and I quote, what the hell are you guys waiting for? We've been ready since 4 p.m. Signed, the 1st Infantry Division.
Have a nice day, and thank you.
That was awesome. That was good. That was actually good.
Okay, I don't think you guys understand how beautiful this really was, okay? It was like an onion of go fuck yourself. There's so many different layers to it. I mean, for one, it's just funny. Two, it demoralizes the enemy because now the enemy knows that we've intercepted their communications, we've broken their battle code, we know they're coming, and we're not scared. And three, the story of this happening spreads through the front lines like absolute wildfire and increases morale like crazy.
Yes, it does.
I mean, could you imagine being a frontline soldier? You've just fended off the infamous German blitzkrieg by Erwin Rommel, and then your good old buddy, your boss, Terry, essentially pulls his junk out, lays it on the table, and asks Erwin Rommel if he wants seconds because he knows that his boys are gonna fuck him up if he does. You'd be absolutely pumped going into that battle, and that's exactly what happened because they stuffed him in the pocket again. At which point, none other than General Patton comes strutting into Terry's headquarters again with a smile on his face and says, and I quote, Terry, when are you gonna learn to take this damn war seriously? The battle continues until April 6th, until they've achieved all of their objectives. After this, the First ID is tasked with basically going around Tunisia and cleaning up all the remnants. They're going around following Terry's command. Terry's launching night attack, day attack, night attack, staggering back and forth, keeping the enemy guessing. It's absolute chaos, and the First ID just mops the floor with the enemy. The entire time, Terry and Teddy Roosevelt Jr. are on the
during all of this time, if I'm not mistaken, Patton was credited with everything, almost everything. I mean, there's a reason why we've never heard of terrible Terry Allen.
front lines telling their men like, okay, once we clean up Tunisia, we're gonna go back to Oran for some R&R. We're gonna have a bunch of fun. We're gonna beat up every MP in town while we do it. Now, while all this is going on, General Terry's starting to get a lot of publicity in Time magazine and the newspapers back home, and Patton is all over PR, right? That dude thrives on PR, and he's starting to kind of like get a little bit jealous that Terry's starting to attract some of the spotlight. Time magazine actually called Terry the best commander of an infantry division in the United States Army, and the next version of Time that comes out, General Patton gives an interview where he describes the combatants of El Gatar, aka the 1st Infantry Division, as a bunch of freshmen. Terry, noticeably fucking furious because he's insulting his precious 1st Infantry Division, calls him out on it. Him and Patton get into a back and forth. Patton calls him tired, and they get in this big pissing match. At one point, Patton actually ends up showing up to Terry's headquarters in person while Terry and the 1st ID are clearing out the rest of Tunisia, and walks in, they're talking, and Terry kind of asks, looking around the HQ, there's, you know, some foxholes dug, and he asks Terry, which one's yours? And Terry points to his foxhole, and Patton walks over and takes a piss in it. At which point, Terry's bodyguards click the safeties off their Tommy guns, and Patton realizes, oh fuck, I might have took this too far. And Patton quickly scurries out of Terry's HQ and fucks off. So
Okay.
Terry is absolutely not getting along
So Patton might not have been the tough guy that, Hollywood portrayed him to be.
with his contemporaries and the men above him in the chain.
I mean, that's the thing, right? His shining glory was the rescue of the 101st Airborne Division. Baston.
Command, but at the end of the day, he really doesn't care what the people above him think about him. He wants to get the job done and take care of the men below him, and that's exactly what he's doing. He's not going to let some big name talk down to his men just so they can get more press. But it's not just Patton. Omar Bradley also does not really like Terry Allen, because Omar Bradley shows up to see how the 1st ID's doing, and what he notices is, unlike all the other infantry divisions that are, eating cold food out of a can, every time he shows up to the 1st ID front lines, their chow halls are full of fresh beef, because apparently they fucking found some on the battlefield. And this was apparently a big deal because they were all ordered to not eat the local livestock for fear of getting people sick, but also just fucking cook the meat. People have been doing this for tens of thousands of years. It's worked fine the entire time. General Terry's gonna bend the rules to get his guys some.
I mean, there's actually this study, right? If you go to the third world where meat regulation or where food sanitation isn't exactly a thing, or I mean, it does exist, but the thing is, scientifically, after you cook food way past the boiling point, regardless if it's been, dropped on the ground, it would be relatively safe to eat. As long as you boil it, or at least you cook it past the boiling point of water or something like that. Because if you live in a third world country where, like I said, sanitation doesn't exist, or sanitation isn't exactly strictly followed, where rats, flies, cockroaches would scurry over your food, I mean, everyone would be sick. So I guess there's something behind that particular scientific explanation or theory that, if you cook it past the boiling point, you should be safe. But then again, guys, no scientist, not that kind of professor, all right? Please put it down in the comments if I'm wrong.
Warm food and take care of them, because that's just the type of guy he is. But Omar Bradley interprets this as him being a poor disciplinarian and being lax on all the policies. So Omar Bradley doesn't really like him either. Regardless, the 1st ID finishes clearing out the rest of Tunisia, and then they go back to Oran for some much needed R&R.
The incident.
So the 1st ID shows up in Oran, and this is where shit kind of hits the fan, because the 1st ID...
I mean, the only incident I've known with regards to this particular campaign or part of the war was when Patton gets sidelined because of when he slapped a soldier, suffering from PTSD, but beyond that, nothing else. I wonder what's this incident.
He took this place over a couple of months ago, and since then, the 2nd wave of American forces has kind of went in, taken it over, and essentially turned it into a major military installation, right? You've got all your administrative people, you've got your supply people, they're all running around in their Class Bs. These guys have never seen combat, they've never seen the front line. And when the 1st ID shows up, they're informed that combat soldiers are not allowed to go into the bars and officer clubs inside of the cities.
Really now?
Pardon me, young man, and excuse the shit out of my goddamn French.
This, rightfully so, does not sit well with the 1st Infantry Division. Like, motherfucker, I'm the one that took this city over and fought the Germans. You showed up after the fact, and now you're gonna tell me I can't go into the bar? Absolutely not. You can go fuck yourself. So there's a bunch of fights, there's a bunch of partying. On one occasion, General Allen is sitting down at a restaurant having lunch when he sees one of his soldiers with the big red 1 patch on his arm getting into a fist fight with a couple of different soldiers in their Class Bs, at which point Terry stops lunch, goes over, breaks up the fight, tells his sergeant, like, hey, sergeant, knock this shit off, yada, 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 goes back to eating lunch. A couple minutes later, fight breaks out again, same exact sergeant. Terry gets up, now he's pissed. Like, Terry's a cool guy, doesn't want to chew you out, but if he gives you a direct order, you better fucking listen. So Terry grabs his sergeant and he's like, Sergeant, I thought I told you to not fight. And the sergeant looks at Terry and goes, General, you didn't hear what they said about the 1st Infantry Division. They said we couldn't fight our way out of a wet paper bag. At which point Terry looks this NCO in the eyes and goes, all right, get back in there. And then proceeded to go back and eat his lunch while he watched this NCO beat up a couple of paper pushers. So it's definitely a shit show going on here, but by the time all this information reaches Eisenhower, all he sees is the word riot written on a piece of paper. He calls Omar Bradley into his office, chews Omar Bradley's ass. Omar Bradley basically blames all of it on Terry Allen, saying that he's a poor disciplinarian and that he's not doing a good job manning his men. So Omar Bradley basically hatches a plan that he's gonna try to get Terry Allen relieved of command. The problem is they're about to go into invade Sicily, and despite the fact
They
that
need
Terry
him.
Allen and Patton don't really like each other, Patton finds out that they're going to not let the 1st Infantry Division partake in the amphibious landings at Gela, at which point Patton says, no, I need those 1st Infantry
need
sons
him.
of bitches, I won't go without them. So General Patton essentially ends up keeping Terry in the fight, not because he likes him, but because he recognizes that he needs him, because Terry Allen is that fucking good. So July 10th,
he
1943, Operation Husky kicks off, the amphibious landing in Sicily, and the 1st Infantry
Yes, he was. He was really that good. So it's really sad that we've almost all of us, including me, all that time on the library reading about this stuff, and I've never actually read or heard of him.
Division is landing at Gela, and they need to take it over. It is heavily fortified, and it is a tough fight the entire time, but Terry gets his men, and they establish this beachhead, and they start moving forward. On the second day of fighting, Terry's back at his headquarters, and Teddy is out on the front line, and where Teddy's at gets overrun by Hermann Göring's tanks. They attack with 60 German tanks. At this point, Terry doesn't have any tanks to send to go fight him, and he doesn't have enough anti-tank in his infantry to be able to do anything. So Terry, thinking fast, orders Teddy to have the men bed down, let the tanks roll right over the top of their fortified positions, and then
There's actually a film called The Belgrade One, and they actually put this on the film where they literally dug themselves into holes and they let the tanks run over them.
once the tanks are past them, fight off all the infantry that's going to be coming in behind them, and that's exactly what they do. But now, Terry still has to figure out what to do with the 60 German tanks making a beeline straight towards him. So Terry sends the order out to his forward observers to get ready to call in for naval gunfire, and then he orders his artillery to lower the guns, and I quote,
Use them as
slug
anti-tank
it out
guns.
when the tanks come. And that's exactly what they do. Teddy and his infantry
I mean, that's a thing. And it was actually, the whole strategy was actually more popular during the Battle of Stalingrad, where they actually used artillery as anti-tank guns. Which is amazing, actually, and I'm not really sure how that's supposed to work, but apparently it did work in the Battle of Stalingrad, and apparently it's gonna work now.
on the front line fend off all the German infantry, and Terry's artillery and naval gunfire takes out all the German tanks. By the end of that day's battle, Terry has lost a ton of men. His line is fractured. He's still got guys all over the place trying to hold on desperately to key terrain features. He's hurting bad, and he still can't get tanks up there. At this point, Terry realizes he needs to pull a Sun Tzu. He needs to appear strong when he's at his weakest, and he issues a single order in all caps. The division attacks at midnight. And that's exactly what happens. At midnight, they open up with naval gunfire and artillery. The 1st ID launches their night attack, catching the Germans completely off guard. And once the smoke settles, they realize that the Germans were gearing up to launch a major offensive the very next day. But the 1st ID and Terry Allen beat them to it, wiping them out and capturing all the objectives by sunrise. Terry Allen and the 1st ID have saved the day. However, we can't say that because we don't like Terry Allen because he takes care of his troops. So rather than crediting Terry Allen, Omar Bradley shifts the credit and gives it to Patton because it's technically Terry Allen's boss, saying, and I quote, General Patton's insistence on having the division for the assault may have saved the Second Corps from disaster.
Okay, I mean, the film was about Patton. The film was titled Patton.
This is a load of barnacles.
After that, the 1st ID is ordered to go take over an airfield. They do that almost immediately, and from there, there's another super hard fight that they're going to need the 1st ID for at a town called Trenoa, which is part of the Edna defense line, and it absolutely has to be captured. The problem is it's a mountainous town in Sicily that's described as being so hilly that it would tax a mountain goat, and there's a bunch of Germans in there that are heavily fortified and ready to fight. So Terry and the 1st ID show up, and this is a hard fight. But Terry's in command. He's shifting soldiers around, forcing the Germans to shift their soldiers around, causing the Germans to expose a weak point, at which point Terry would attack. He just out-finesses the German command at every possible turn, and the 1st ID takes over the town in 6 days. And then holds it while the Germans desperately launch 24 counteroffensive towards him, and he stuffed every single one of them. Now, in the midst of the battle, as it became apparent that Terry Allen might actually pull this shit off, 2 other generals, General Wyman and General Huber, showed up as observers. They then proceed to sit back, watch Terry Allen and the 1st ID out-finesse the Germans at every conceivable turn, take over the entire town in 6 days, breaking the Edna defensive line, and then, once the battle was over, they informed Terry Allen and Teddy Roosevelt Jr. that they are both being relieved of command under the orders of General Eisenhower and General Omar Bradley. And the reasoning for it was essentially what it was back in
I mean, all of that bureaucratic crap, the army is a bureaucracy, people. of course, bullshit like this was going to happen. It was meant to happen.
When they planned
Army,
the
don't
entire
make
thing,
mistakes,
saying
boy.
that Terry Allen was a poor disciplinarian, and because of that, the 1st Infantry Division had become too unruly. So the entire 1st Infantry Division is absolutely furious. They absolutely love their fighting general, Terry Allen. Terry Allen is absolutely furious because, well, his career is essentially over and he is being shipped back to the United States. Ironically, just 2 days after he is officially relieved of command of the 1st Infantry Division, he ends up on the cover of Time magazine praising
Nice.
him as the best fighting general in the United States Army. And now he's been relieved of command and is getting sent back to the United States. And you have to understand, in World War II, when you were relieved of command and sent back to the United States, like, that was it. You were done. You were going to be in charge of like a training facility or some bullshit. You were never going to see combat
Yeah.
or major warfare
What a
ever
waste.
again. This is the end of Terry Allen's career.
Yes, it was the Timberwolves.
So Terry makes it back to the United States, doesn't really have orders. He's on rest and recuperation. And after 7 weeks, he receives a letter from General Eisenhower that says,
What
and
now?
I quote, "I'm certain that after you've had your well-deserved rest from the battlefield, your experience and courage will command your assignment to equally, if not more important duty."
I'm back, baby!
Apparently,
Wait,
while
what?
Omar Bradley and Patton don't like Allen, Eisenhower still does, and he's the top dog. Because of this,
Yes,
both
he is.
Terry and Roosevelt are given a second shot at command. Teddy Roosevelt Jr. is famously sent back overseas, where he partakes in the first wave landing of
There we
Utah
go.
Beach during D-Day.
He was
and
killed,
Terry
right? I
Allen
mean, according to that particular film, The Longest Day, he died in the first wave. But am I wrong? I mean, wait. All we have to do is just wait for a couple of seconds and we will find the answer.
is sent to Oregon, where he assumes command of the 104th Infantry Division, aka the Timberwolves.
Oh.
Terry assumes command in October of
There we go.
1943, and for almost a year, he trains this
See?
unit to get ready for combat.
Can
They
someone please put it down in the comments?
train all over the country. They train in Oregon. They train in California. They train at Camp Hyder for desert combat. They are ready for absolutely anything. And the entire time, Terry Allen dedicates 35 hours a week to night combat. And the Timberwolves
course.
become the first ever U.S. Army unit to specialize
happened
in
to his big
nighttime
red one?
operations. September 1944, Terry Allen and the Timberwolves make their way into northern France, fighting alongside British and Canadian units, most likely an effort to keep Terry Allen away from all the other United States generals. Once Terry gets in France, his first order of business is to go to the graveside of one of his best friends, Teddy Roosevelt Jr., the only general to land in the first wave of D-Day, who
So he was killed, right?
would pass away just 6 days later from a heart attack. and be
Okay.
posthumously
So he wasn't killed in combat. He passed away from natural causes. I mean, that would have sucked. After the longest day and you pass away from natural causes? But then again, we never know.
awarded the Medal of Honor. And after that,
Was.
Terry Allen is pissed
deserved.
and goes on an absolute tear through the enemy. Shortly after the British and the Canadians witness the Timberwolves in combat operations, Canadian General G.G. Simmons says, and I
Wait, Timberwolves, is this the unit that had Native Americans in it? There was a whole Netflix film about this done in rotoscope.
quote, "Once the Timberwolves got their teeth into the Germans, they showed great dash. The British and Canadian troops on their flanks expressed great admiration for their courage and enthusiasm. When they again meet the Germans, all hell cannot stop the Timberwolves." And he was
They can.
absolutely correct, because Terry Allen and the Timberwolves fight through northern
Apart from being an NBA team, are there are Timberwolves a thing? I mean, are they actually real wolves? Can someone please put it down in the comments if they're real? Or if they're like just a term that, you know, they hang out in the woods or something. I mean, I know there's an NBA team named after them, but beyond that, I know nothing else. So please, can someone please put it down in the comments?
France. They fight through the Netherlands. They push the Germans back past the Meuse River. They help capture Antwerp. They capture the major industrial city of Stolberg. They run down the
Nothing.
German army, liberating towns
Stop
left and
Timberwolf
right. During the
Wolf
Battle of the
Division.
Bulge, the last
Singular.
ditch German Hail Mary of an offensive, they not only hold their positions, but they contain the Germans on the northern flank. Due to their ability to operate at night, the British and the Canadians simply start calling the Timberwolves the Night Fighters. They are so
Nice.
impressed by Terry Allen and the Timberwolves that Sir Alexander Harold of the British Army calls Terry Allen the best division commander he's seen in 2 world wars. Bear in mind, this is at a time where British and American officers had a rivalry and didn't think very highly of each other at all. From there, the Timberwolves come up on the historic German city of Halle. It's this beautiful town that's been there forever, and it is being occupied by German soldiers under the command of Felix von Luckner, the famed Sea Raider from World War I. Terry Allen personally brokers their surrender by basically coming to the negotiating table and telling Luckner, hey, look, this is a really pretty historic city. If you don't surrender now, I'm going to level the whole fucking thing. So he reluctantly...
Yeah, I mean, he never really cared about the whole dog and pony show stuff, so I doubt he'd care about history or the importance of a historical town, since he cares more about his men, so leveling this town wouldn't matter to him.
Agrees to surrender to Terry Allen. The Timberwolves then continue to push further inland until they actually run into the Soviet Red Army, at which point Terry Allen takes the patch off of his arm and declares the Soviet commander an honorary Timberwolf, and the Soviet officer does the same to Terry Allen. And according to legend, they spent that night having a drinking competition, and Terry Allen won. From there,
you have 2 wolves inside of you, and they're both boys, and they're kissing. I'm so sorry. No, that meme, that military meme just came to my head.
Timberwolves moved to help seal the Ruhr pocket, cutting off 300,000 German soldiers and ultimately forcing them to surrender before they moved on to liberate a concentration camp. Shortly after that, the Germans would surrender, the Timberwolves was deactivated in July of 1945, and Terry Allen would finally retire in 1946 after achieving his redemption of not only getting fired from his initial job, but taking a year to train another.
I was honestly under the impression that he went on to fight in the Korean War or something.
Unit, fighting all the way across the European theater, and he still beat Patton into Germany by 4 months. After a lifetime of military service, Terry retired, moved to his wife's hometown in El Paso, Texas, where he became an insurance salesman and was very active in the veterans community, helping out any and every way that he possibly could. Unfortunately, at the age of 79, Terry would make one final sacrifice for his country. His 38-year-old son, Terry Allen Jr., was killed in combat in Vietnam, and Terry would pass away 2 years later at the age of 81. He is currently buried at Fort Bliss National Cemetery with his wife and his son. And that is the story of Terry De La Mesa Allen, aka Terrible Terry, the general that cared more about his subordinates than the opinions of his contemporaries.
He was
the man who legendary
Gangster
war correspondent Ermi Pyle described as the greatest leader of men and the greatest tactical general in the United States Army. And in my opinion, the most gangster general of World War II.
Yes, he was.
Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over to fatelectrician.com. Quack bang out.
Bye! Thank you for watching, guys. Now, if you want me to check out other stories here on YouTube, please let me know in the comments. We upload every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard. Please like, share, subscribe, do the whole notification button thing to help me out with the algo. And don't forget to check out our Twitch channel where you can catch me do this live. Now, class dismissed.